Hey, what is up everybody? It's Animac here for AnimeUproar, and let me ask you a question. Why would a master swordsman who dedicated his entire life to being a demon slayer betray the demon slayer core in order to become the second most powerful demon in the world, second only to Muzan himself? Why would someone who had a close personal connection to the strongest demon slayer in history, Yoriichi Tsugikuni, and someone who abandoned his own family just to focus full time on becoming a demon slayer, one day decide to accept a deal with the devil, turn against his own comrades, and cut them down on Muzan's orders? In this video, I will reveal the dark truth about the biggest and most dangerous traitor in the history of the Demon Slayer Corps, Upper Moon 1, Kokushibo. If you guys enjoy our Demon Slayer content and you want us to keep it going, just leave a quick like and comment. It only takes a second, but it really helps with that YouTube algorithm. And if you're looking for a completely free but important way of supporting the channel directly, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. It might seem like a small, unimportant thing, but here on YouTube, subscribing matters a lot. Finally, this video will contain Demon Slayer manga spoilers, so please proceed with caution, you have been warned. Kokushibo was born nearly 500 years ago, and Kokushibo was not his birth name. Instead, his birth name was Michikatsu Tsugikuni, and he wasn't born alone. Michikatsu had a younger twin brother, and his name was Yoriichi Tsugikuni, the same Yoriichi who would one day become the strongest demon slayer of all time and the original Breath of the Sun user. Michikatsu and Yoriichi came from a powerful samurai family, and at this time during the Sengoku period, twins were considered to be a bad omen. That's because the fact that they were born at practically the same time could result in a succession dispute down the line. On top of that, Yoriichi was born with a strange birthmark on his face, and so their father decided that the best thing to do would be to simply get rid of little Yoriichi. That would eliminate any potential succession battles in the future, and it would also appease everyone who had superstitious fears about Yoriichi's birthmark. However, Michikatsu and Yoriichi's mother refused to let this happen, and she became so angry and aggressive that her husband had to agree to spare Yoriichi's life. Instead of eliminating the younger twin, the family would raise him until he reached the age of 10, and then they would send him to a temple where he would become a monk. Since monks must renounce all of their worldly possessions, Yoriichi will have no claim to the family's property and status, and so Michikatsu could seamlessly succeed his father as the head of the family. After this decision was made, the two brothers had a completely different upbringing. Michikatsu was groomed to become the head of the family, and so he had superior living quarters, fancier clothes, better food, better education, and so on. And while Michikatsu was busy preparing himself to one day succeed his father, Yoriichi became extremely attached to their mother, and he would always be clinging to her left side. Michikatsu pitied his little brother, so he would often sneak into his brother's little room in order to play with him. Michikatsu wasn't able to give Yoriichi any of his possessions because their father would notice and become angry, so Michikatsu gave his brother a wooden flute that he himself had made. Yoriichi was an unusual child. He never smiled, not even as a baby, and he didn't speak until the age of 7. Everyone thought that maybe he was deaf and so he would never be able to speak properly, but Michikatsu learned that his brother wasn't deaf one day when he was doing sword practice in the garden. Yoriichi was standing silently behind Michikatsu and watching him, but then suddenly he actually said something. He said, "My brother, is your dream to become the strongest samurai in the nation?" Michikatsu was so shocked to hear his brother speaking for the first time that he gasped and dropped his wooden training sword. Yoriichi then said that he also wanted to become a samurai, but Michikatsu knew that when he turned 10, Yoriichi would be sent to a temple. He was destined to become a monk, not a samurai. Then Michikatsu saw his brother smile for the first time, and it was such a strange sight that it actually disturbed him. Knowing that Yoriichi was going to be sent to a temple, and also knowing that Yoriichi was a mama's boy who constantly clung to their mother, Michikatsu didn't take Yoriichi's words about becoming a samurai very seriously. And yet, after that brief conversation, Yoriichi started hanging around his brother and the family's swordsmanship instructor during their swordsmanship training, and he expressed a desire to learn the way of the sword. The instructor was their father's vassal, and he didn't see any harm in letting Yoriichi practice with them, so he gave him a wooden practice sword. And that is when it happened. After only a few words of basic instruction, the instructor asked Yoriichi to try and hit him. Michikatsu wasn't expecting much from this, since he himself had never succeeded in landing a single hit on their instructor no matter how hard he tried, But the 7-year-old Yoriichi managed to land 4 strong blows on their instructor in the blink of an eye. And these hits were so strong that they knocked the instructor out. Yoriichi's blows didn't break any bones or cause any permanent injuries, but they left massive lumps on the instructor's body in the places where the wooden sword had hit. After this incident, Yoriichi stopped saying that he wanted to be a samurai. He hated the feeling of hitting someone, and he didn't want anything to do with that type of life. But Michikatsu wanted to know the secret behind Yoriichi's strength, so he kept pushing him to explain how he became so strong. That's when we learned that even as a kid, Yoriichi could see into the transparent world, so he could anticipate his opponent's movements based on the positions of their bones, the contractions of their muscles, and the flow of their blood. Yoriichi was also born with exceptional strength and speed, and that is when Michikatsu came to a startling conclusion. All this time he had pitied his younger brother, but the truth was that Yoriichi was actually far superior to him. Now, Michikatsu worked hard and he had talent, so he definitely got stronger. But his progress was negligible compared to the overpowering natural talents of Yoriichi. And even though Yoriichi wasn't interested in the samurai life anymore, after the instructor told their father about Yoriichi's incredible talent, the father suddenly changed his mind. He now wanted Yoriichi to take over as the head of the family instead of Michikatsu, and Michikatsu was now forced to sleep in that small, isolated room where Yoriichi had slept all this time. Worse yet, Michikatsu was now to be sent to the temple when he turned 10 instead of Yoriichi, which meant that Michikatsu's lifelong dream of becoming a samurai would never come true. But then, one night while Michikatsu was lying in bed, Yoriichi came to him and told him that their mother had died. Michikatsu was shocked by this and he thought the death must have been very sudden, but Yoriichi merely told him to ask her servant about the details because he will now be departing for the temple. Michikatsu is confused by this since Yoriichi was no longer being forced to go to the temple, but Yoriichi says that he just wanted to say goodbye. Yoriichi also said that he will bring the wooden flute that Michikatsu had made for him so that he could feel close to his older brother wherever he goes. Michikatsu thought that flute was a poorly made piece of junk that couldn't even produce sounds properly, and he was surprised to see Yoriichi safeguarding it inside a cloth and acting like it was some sort of treasure. Yoriichi then left for the temple, and Michikatsu proceeded to read his mother's journal. As he read the journal, he learned that Yoriichi had sensed that their father was planning to designate him as the heir instead of Michikatsu, so he left for the temple earlier than expected. That way, their father would have no choice but to stick to the original plan and allow Michikatsu to succeed him as the head of the family. Michikatsu also realized that his mother had been suffering from an illness for years, and that Yoriichi had sensed it. This illness affected the left side of their mother's body, so when Yoriichi was clinging to that side, he wasn't really clinging. Instead, he was supporting her because her body had been weakened from the illness. And in that moment, as he realized that Yoriichi was so much more observant and talented and compassionate than him, Michikatsu began to burn with jealousy. It was like Yoriichi was perfect in every way, superior in every way, and in that moment, Michikatsu hated his own brother from the bottom of his heart because he was so profoundly jealous of Yoriichi's genius. The irony here is that when Yoriichi was treated as the black sheep of the family, Michikatsu felt sorry for him and he tried to help him. But it is clear that in his own mind, Michikatsu had also accepted the idea that he was superior to Yoriichi. When the tables turned and Yoriichi was shown to be far more impressive than his brother in practically every way, Michikatsu's ego couldn't handle it, and he began wishing that his brother had never been born because his very existence defied the laws of nature. Nevertheless, Michikatsu's jealousy subsided after Yoriichi disappeared from his life. Although their father tried to bring Yoriichi back from the temple, Yoriichi had disappeared without a trace and no one could find him anywhere. And so, Michikatsu's father had no choice but to go back to the original plan. Michikatsu was the heir apparent again, and as 10 years passed, he settled down and started a family. His days were tranquil and boring, and he lived a calm and comfortable life. But then, one day, a demon attacked Michikatsu and his men in the forest. The demon killed Michikatsu's men and was about to kill him as well when an adult Yoriichi showed up and took the demon down in an instant. The moment that Michikatsu saw his brother again, he could tell right away that Yoriichi had mastered the sword and that he was an incredible warrior. Michikatsu's serenity was destroyed and he began to burn with jealousy yet again. Yoriichi was unbelievably strong and he had an impeccable character, and Michikatsu decided that he would do anything to become as strong and as skilled with a sword as his brother. So Michikatsu abandoned his family and he dedicated his entire life to becoming a demon slayer, which was the same path that Yoriichi had chosen. Michikatsu trained directly under Yoriichi and he learned breathing techniques directly from his brother. But none of the Demon Slayers, Michikatsu included, were able to match Yoriichi's power. They simply could not replicate the breathing style that he used, the breath of the sun. So Yoriichi changed the breathing technique slightly as he taught them to different individuals in order to make it possible for them to actually learn and master these techniques. That is how all the many derivatives of sun breathing emerged, and one of those derivatives was Michikatsu's own moon breathing. Eventually, Michikatsu manifested a Demon Slayer mark identical to the one that his twin brother was born with, and overall, Michikatsu became an extremely strong swordsman and a top-tier Demon Slayer. But despite his clearly impressive strength, he still couldn't measure up to Yoriichi. No matter how hard he trained and no matter how much of his life he dedicated to getting stronger, Michikatsu could never learn sun breathing, and he could never compare to the godlike skill and talent of his brother. To make things worse, all the Demon Slayers who managed to manifest the Demon Slayer mark began to die off after reaching the age of 25. The Demon Slayer mark bestowed the Slayer with more power, but in exchange it drastically shortened his lifespan. Michikatsu realized that he was going to die without ever even coming close to achieving his dream of becoming the strongest samurai and surpassing his brother. And that is when the notorious Demon King Muzan approached him with a proposal. Muzan told Michikatsu that if he became a demon, he could live forever and he wouldn't have to worry about dying at the age of 25. He would have a much stronger body and he would have all of eternity to keep getting stronger until his strength finally surpassed even Yoriichi. Despite dedicating his entire life to being a demon slayer and destroying demons, Michikatsu's jealousy and ego got the best of him. He made a deal with the devil. He agreed to consume Muzan's blood and become a demon in exchange for eternal life and superhuman power. Afterwards, Michikatsu Tsugikuni became Kokushibo, and he turned against his own demon slayer comrades. Together with Muzan, he cut down the very demon slayers that he had once called his brethren so that no one would ever get in the way of his and Muzan's plans. But even after 60 years of being a demon, Kokushibo still wasn't able to surpass Yoriichi. The two brothers would come face to face again when Yoriichi was already in his mid-80s. Naturally, Yoriichi did not die at the age of 25 despite having the Demon Slayer mark, which again emphasized the fact that Yoriichi was special and more gifted than his brother. Being a demon, Kokushibo didn't age and so he was still at peak strength. Meanwhile, Yoriichi was a frail old man who inhabited a weak human body instead of an immortal demon body. And yet, even after 6 decades, Yoriichi was still stronger than Kokushibo. His technique was so flawless and godlike that he defeated the demon Kokushibo despite being an octogenarian. However, Yoriichi died of old age before he had the chance to strike the finishing blow against Kokushibo. And so, Kokushibo survived the battle, but he was forced to live another 400 years with the knowledge that even as an old man, Yoriichi was still stronger than him. To make things worse, when Kokushibo cut down Yoriichi's lifeless body, he found that small wooden flute that he had made for his brother back when they were children. Despite the fact that Kokushibo had betrayed the Demon Slayer Corps and despite the fact that he became a ruthless demon, Yoriichi still carried that stupid crappy flute that his twin brother gave him all those years ago. So not only was Yoriichi stronger than Kokushibo even in his 80s, but he still remained a man of flawless character and endless compassion until the very end. As for Kokushibo himself, he remained conflicted. He was conflicted between his love for his brother on the one hand and his burning jealousy of him on the other. And he was also conflicted between his lifelong desire to be an honorable samurai warrior and the reality of having become a demonic monster. These inner conflicts would finally boil over during Kokushibo's final battle against Muichiro, Genya, Sanemi, and Gyomei inside the Infinity Castle. The first opponent that Kokushibo encounters is the mist hashira Muichiro. Muichiro is immediately intimidated by Kokushibo's overpowering aura, but Kokushibo's actual behavior is not what you would expect from some bloodthirsty demon. Kokushibo is calm, dignified, and polite, and he even asks for his opponent's name before the battle begins. Once the hashira introduces himself as Muichiro Tokito, Kokushibo gives him his own human name, Michikatsu Tsugikuni. Kokushibo can sense that Muichiro is actually a descendant of one of the children that he had left behind back when he abandoned his family in order to become a demon slayer. The Tsugikuni family name must have died out over time, but Muichiro was still a direct blood descendant of Kokushibo. This is a surprise to Muichiro, but it doesn't change anything in terms of his own goals and principles. He steals his nerves and attacks Kokushibo with his mist breathing techniques. As Muichiro attempts to land a hit on Kokushibo, he keeps missing over and over again, but Kokushibo is still impressed with the strength, skill, and courage of his descendant, especially since Muichiro is still only 14 years old. Kokushibo decides that Muichiro has earned his respect, and so he finally draws his sword, because not doing so would be considered disrespectful towards his opponent. Again, notice that Kokushibo continues to cling to strict samurai etiquette despite being a demon, which tells us that Kokushibo has not given up on his humanity, at least not fully. If you pay close attention during his fights, you will also notice that Kokushibo doesn't like sustaining the kinds of injuries that would kill a human. Even though he clearly possesses demonic regeneration, he doesn't like having to use it. It's almost as if he considers resorting to regeneration to be shameful, because if he had allowed himself to be injured in that way as a human, he would have died. As soon as Kokushibo draws his sword and reveals his moon breathing technique, Muichiro is hit and loses his hand. But the young Hashira is unfazed by this. He just uses his shirt to make a tourniquet and continues to fight with his other hand. Kokushibo is greatly impressed by Muichiro, but more than just being impressed by the actions of some random stranger, Kokushibo is also proud of his descendant. He believes that killing Muichiro, who is such a talented warrior, would be a shame, and he decides to ask Muzan to turn Muichiro into a demon. This is all important stuff, because you don't see someone like Muzan worrying about codes of honor, samurai etiquette, or descendants. Muzan is willing to do literally anything to stay alive and satisfy his own desires, and all moral codes, values, and principles are nothing to him. So there is a stark difference between Kokushibo and Muzan in this regard. Kokushibo then pins Muichiro down to a pillar by piercing him through the chest with his own sword. Having immobilized his descendant, Kokushibo plans to summon Muzan and turn Muichiro into a demon. However, Kokushibo has to postpone this plan because he is soon attacked by other demon slayers. First, 𝔽 arrives and Kokushibo takes care of him pretty easily, but then Sanemi and 𝔽 also join the battle, and Kokushibo is forced to turn his attention to fighting the two hashira. Muichiro uses the fact that Kokushibo is busy fighting 𝔽 and Sanemi to pull the sword that had been pinning him to the pillar from his own chest with his own bare hands. We can only imagine the kind of pain that this caused him and the insane amount of strength and courage that was required for Muichiro to pull this off. Say what you will about Kokushibo's warped samurai values, but he was certainly right to be impressed by Muichiro. At this point, Muichiro already knows that he will almost certainly die from blood loss as a result of the injuries that he has already suffered, but he is determined to make a real impact on the outcome of the battle before he dies. He jumps into the thick of the battle and saves Sanemi from one of Kokushibo's attacks, and then, determined to help while he is still able to move, Muichiro launches an assault on Kokushibo. While Kokushibo is distracted by attacks from 𝔽 and Sanemi, Muichiro manages to move close enough to pierce Kokushibo's torso with his sword. Muichiro loses one of his legs during this approach, but that doesn't matter to him. He is willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to win this battle. As the epic battle rages, Muichiro is determined to protect 𝔽 and Sanemi so that they will survive and be able to continue to fight in the battle against Muzan. He is so determined to help defeat Kokushibo before he dies that his Nichirin blade suddenly turns red. And this causes such pain to Kokushibo that he is unable to move. Don't forget that red Nichirin blades can burn demons on a cellular level, which drastically reduces their ability to regenerate. A dying 𝔽 then manages to use his blood demon art to keep Kokushibo in place long enough for Sanemi and 𝔽 to take off his head. But even the loss of his head isn't enough to take down a demon of Kokushibo's caliber. As the demon slayers look on in shock, Upper Moon 1 is able to regenerate even his head. But this second head looks nothing like a human head. It is a monstrous demonic head, and when Kokushibo catches a glimpse of his own face, he is stunned and disgusted. And that is when the inner conflicts between Kokushibo's deeply held samurai values and the reality of being a demon finally come to a head. Ever since he was a child, Kokushibo wanted to become the strongest samurai in the world, but after many years of trying his best, he eventually realized that he could never surpass his incredibly talented twin brother, Yoriichi. Yoriichi had almost supernatural, godlike talent that simply could not be surpassed. And so, despite the fact that Kokushibo was an incredibly strong swordsman back when he was human, perhaps even the second strongest swordsman in the world after Yoriichi, he was never quite good enough to compete with his brother. All his training and dedication certainly bore fruit and he became an unbelievable warrior, but there was just no way for him to ever compare to Yoriichi. Kokushibo tried everything to catch up to his brother. He abandoned his family, he betrayed his comrades, and he gave up his very humanity to surpass his brother and to avoid defeat. But in the end, even a deal with the devil himself didn't allow him to achieve his dream. Not only did he still fail to defeat Yoriichi, but he also failed to fulfill his initial dream, the one he had before becoming jealous of his brother. The dream of becoming the strongest samurai. Upon seeing his reflection, Kokushibo realized that even if he had succeeded in becoming stronger than Yoriichi once he became a demon, he would still not be the strongest samurai. That is because a samurai lives by a code of honor. A samurai has values that he would never abandon, and a samurai would rather die than live dishonorably. A true samurai would never willingly choose to become a demon just to avoid accepting defeat. A true samurai would never devour innocent people just to get stronger, and a true samurai doesn't have the face and body of a monster. Kokushibo can't believe that he allowed his fear of defeat to turn him into an inhuman creature. Kokushibo's internal conflicts reach a boiling point. He experiences a severe crisis of conscience, and his body begins to break apart in the place where Muichiro had stabbed him with his red blade. Kokushibo is then finished off by 𝔽ℂ𝕂 and Sanemi, and then, after nearly 500 years of life, Upper Moon 1 Kokushibo is destroyed. Genya and Muichiro both die from the wounds they suffered in the battle against Kokushibo, but Sanemi and 𝔽ℂ𝕂 live long enough to fight in the final battle against Muzan. Unlike Muzan, who completely abandoned his humanity in the pursuit of power and immortality, Kokushibo could never fully give up on his human side. Despite making a deal with the devil, and despite betraying and cutting down his own comrades, he still held on to his humanity. He still saw himself as a samurai who followed a code of honor and proper etiquette. He still felt an attachment to his family, which is why he was so proud of Muichiro, and he still felt a deep connection to his brother, Yoriichi. Even though a part of him hated Yoriichi due to jealousy, a part of him still loved his brother, and we see proof of that when Kokushibo's body finally disintegrates, and all that's left is his clothing and the broken flute that he had made for his brother all those centuries ago. Kokushibo had held on to that flute for literally centuries, just like he had held on to at least some fragment of his humanity. This is why I love Kokushibo as a character. Yes, he is incredibly strong and badass. Yes, he has a great design, but he is also a deeply flawed and in some ways hypocritical character, and in that sense, he is a deeply human character, despite being an overpowered demon who was supposed to have abandoned his humanity. It is quite likely that even the team-up of 3 different Hashira and Genya would not have been successful in taking Kokushibo down if he wasn't also faced with a massive crisis of conscience at the same time. If Kokushibo had been a completely amoral sociopath like Muzan or Doma, he likely would have won the fight against the Demon Slayers and Muzan would never have been defeated. But interestingly enough, Kokushibo was so shocked by his own lack of humanity that he couldn't keep fighting. And so ironically, what was left of his humanity was the very thing that ultimately led to his defeat. His defeat itself proved that in the end, Kokushibo was still human, at least to some extent. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and definitely let me know what you think of Kokushibo's character down in the comments below. If you're looking for a video to watch next, check out my extensive breakdown of every Upper Demon Moon's death. I will link it in the description. Be sure to leave a quick like and comment if you want to support this video in that treacherous YouTube algorithm. And if you're new here or you watch our videos but you just haven't taken the time to subscribe yet, do me a huge favor and make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. It seems like a small and unimportant thing, but actually subscribing really helps out a lot on YouTube. You can also hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at AnimeUproar. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys!